Ms. Swear, I'd like to start with you. Tell us a little bit about how many people in the United States every year are using, how many times each year does an American use a firearm in self-defense?
So we don't have an exact number, but when you look at sort of the conglomerate of studies, they mostly find that, with a couple very limited exceptions that are outliers, somewhere between 500,000 to several million times a year. And I would note that the most extensive study on this issue, the 2021 National Firearm Survey, further validated some of those earlier studies and came to a conclusion of about 1.6 million. And again, that was the most extensive survey ever conducted of firearms owners.
Okay. What would that tell us about risks associated with putting legal restrictions on the books, to the extent that those legal restrictions might impair the ability of the law-abiding to use those for lawful purposes, given that it's normally law-abiding people who are most likely to comply with a new law? What would that do to those people?
Well, so it shows us generally that it's all about understanding where the risk is. For your ordinary law-abiding, peaceable citizen who is mentally stable and not experiencing extreme stressors, which is, most American gun owners at any given point, right? Their biggest benefit is that they can now protect themselves against their biggest, most substantial threat, which is external crime. But I think most people on this panel would agree, when you flip that, there are cases, right, where if you are now mentally unstable, if you are experiencing crisis, you statistically might be the bigger threat to yourself, or if you are the one perpetuating crime, right? Well, now you are statistically the threat that needs to be solved. So it's about understanding where that threat is. And again, for your ordinary law-abiding gun owner, that threat is external. It's not internal. And that ability to possess that firearm is actually a net benefit to them. Again, assuming that they are not, leaving guns under their couch cushion for their 6-year-old to find and that sort of thing. That can be problematic. But in the net, yes, it's a positive for them.
That's helpful. And that's helpful to a point that one of my colleagues made earlier in the hearing, which is that I think we all want to get to a similar place insofar as we're focused on wanting to protect human life. We want fewer deaths. And dangerous things can happen if we assume that when we pass a law, it's going to be a net life savings, when that's not necessarily always the case. So when you had the governor of New Mexico issue a public health emergency declaration and put in place this executive order dramatically restricting the ability of law-abiding persons to possess firearms in certain places, that's significant. Now, when you look at the New Mexico case in particular, you've researched that and you found some fascinating information. Is it true that you discovered that in New Mexico only 0.002% of concealed carry permit holders in New Mexico had their permits revoked for any reason?
So I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but that sounds correct. And it is generally the case when you look at permit revocations in any state, they are minuscule. And that's, again, for any violation. That doesn't necessarily mean that it was revoked because they used their weapon violently. Sometimes it can be, they had a DUI or any sort of non-weapon related offense. But on the whole, when you look at those numbers, concealed carry permit holders are amongst, if not the most law-abiding segment of the population.
And yet Governor Grisham's executive order would have affected them disproportionately. Meanwhile, you've got new research that's been done, and a lot of experts in the field from across the political spectrum and across the country have weighed in on this. Earlier this year, the chief of the D.C. Police Department, Chief Robert Conte, said, quote, "If we really want to see homicides go down," which I think we've established here, we want to save lives. We really want to see homicides go down. Keep bad guys with guns in jail. He went on to say, quote, "Right now, the average homicide suspect has been arrested 11 times prior to them committing a homicide." In 2021, there was a study commissioned by the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform that found gun violence in D.C. to be tightly concentrated on a very small number of high-risk individuals. In fact, they estimate that within a year, there are 500 identifiable people considered to be very high risk, and these very high risk individuals comprise 60 to 70% of all gun violence in the district. So there again, we have the problem. If what we focus on is rules that are going to be new rules, separate and apart from the dozens of laws that have normally been broken, the minute someone commits a gun crime, the minute someone kills another human being with a gun, if by adding another gun law, a gun law of much wider applicability, and if what we're doing is restricting and restraining the rights of the law-abiding and hence their ability to defend themselves, will that necessarily save lives?
No, Senator, and that's actually one of the things that I'm talking about in my testimony when I referenced this idea of a lot of our commonly proposed gun control laws. They're not actually designed to get at any of the underlying factors. So if you just tag on another law, whatever it is, okay, now it's a universal background check or a magazine capacity restriction, the people who were already illegally possessing those firearms to commit illegal crimes are not going to suddenly say, oh, it's what's triply illegal, so now I won't do it. All you're doing is sort of expanding the likelihood that an otherwise ordinary, peaceable citizen is going to get caught up in sort of a tic-tac offense, or even worse, it could actually undermine their ability to defend themselves in the most acute sort of self-defense scenarios.
And of the 250,000 gun criminals incarcerated, surveyed, only 1% of them bought them from a retail source. The rest of them bought them through some underground illegal avenue or on the street or something like that. So we got to be very careful. Let's not punish the law-abiding and thereby restrict their ability to protect themselves. That will cost lives, not save them.